Chaotic times plus zombies plus double male lead plus head-blowing pleasure plus and no stalking plus and no rebirth plus and no Virgin Mary plus and no abilities plus realistic immersion. The city inexplicably erupted with a zombie virus, and Qin Hai's roommate suddenly went berserk. Unable to understand the situation, Qin Hai fled to his colleague and friend Ding Cheng, and together with several of his friends, they escaped from the zombie den. Along the way, they faced difficulties and obstacles, making it even more difficult to deal with the tide of corpses and people's hearts. Chapter 1. Virus, that's it. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. The camera shook violently, and Qin Hai's face suddenly appeared in the frame. It's noon on December 8, 2023, and there are no living people or vaccines in the research building. This place has also fallen. He glanced alertly at the back of the camera and said, I'm going to the Blue Warehouse pharmaceutical base now. It's over 30 kilometers away from here. If there. He bit his lip, the light in his eyes slowly fading away, and his gaze suddenly flickered. I don't know, maybe the situation I'm talking about won't happen. If we find the vaccine, we can go back to the base, and then. Before he could finish speaking, a roar echoed from far to near through the camera, causing the frame to shake wildly again. Then, the camera fell hard to the ground, and after a moment of mosaic, it became clear. Qin Hai fainted in the camera, the fallen tabletop hitting him, accompanied by countless lifeless, withered legs resembling old branches walking past him with low growls. Suddenly, Qin Hai was pulled out of the frame with both hands on Saturday, September 16, 2023 at 22:49, Qin Hai lowered his head and pressed the phone charging by the bedside. The tense filming work finally came to an end, but fortunately, there were not many photos taken. With a brief retouching, the work was quickly completed. Qin Hai stood up and stretched lazily, responding to a message from photography assistant Ding Cheng. The two talked about the incident where Wang Qian, the owner of the gold mine, scratched her arm while trying to save the dog during filming, and joked that there were many people who raised the dog as a son. Before turning off the lights and going to bed, Qin Hai heard that his brother Wang Kaixian, who was sharing the apartment with him, had just returned. Due to Qin Hai's relatively low salary, he found someone to share an 88-square-meter house in the suburbs. Wang Kaixian works as a chef at a small restaurant not far downstairs, and he gets home at this time almost every day. I don't know how long it took, but suddenly a series of strange noises woke Qin Hai up from his sleep. He glanced at his phone in a daze. After 3 o'clock in the morning, more than 10 missed calls. Just as he was about to click on it to enter, the sound outside the bedroom door came again. Qin Hai looked up and saw some very faint light through the crack in the door, thinking that maybe the guy accidentally bumped into something. After about half a minute, his consciousness was about to blur when another noise came from the living room, completely waking him up without any sleep. He felt a bit suffocated in his heart, flipped over from the bed, opened the door, and strode to the living room. Without seeing anything clearly, he let out a loud roar. Are you sick? What time is it and you still haven't slept? After shouting, I realized that there was no one in the living room and no lights were on. The light came from the kitchen. Wang Kaixian just finished work at a small restaurant, isn't he hungry again at this point? He was thinking about it when he walked over with a clanging sound coming from inside. Before he could enter, he saw a pair of legs on the ground outside the door constantly kicking. Seeing this scene, Qin Hai realized that something might have happened. Could it be that he had a disease? As soon as he thought of this, he quickly walked a few steps to the front and saw Wang Kaixian on the ground holding a bag of raw pork bones in the refrigerator, which he had bought at a discount at the supermarket last night for soup making. The blood in the bag had not yet solidified. Wang Kaixian's eating behavior was like that of a starving wild beast, burying its head in the smell of blood and biting the big stick bones with a loud bang, which made the scene nauseating. Qin Hai frowned and asked him with an incredulous expression on his face, "What are you doing?" "Don't worry," this speech seemed to interrupt Wang Kaixian's lively night snack time. He slowly turned his head to look at Qin Hai, his eyes covered in red blood, and his originally dark brown eyes were now gray and blurry. Wang Kaixian threw down his bones and stood up, swinging his head left and right, slowly walking towards Qin Hai. The distance between the two of them gradually drew closer, and Qin Hai felt uncomfortable. He retreated repeatedly, clanging and knocking down an empty beer bottle on the ground. The bottle fell and made a continuous inertial sound. At this moment, Wang Kaixian's firepower was fully activated and suddenly accelerated towards him. The living room was not very big at all, and in just 1 or 2 seconds, Wang Kaixian was already standing in front of him. It was obvious that this was an attacking posture, and Qin Hai roared and pushed him away. "You are sick. Rabies attack you." Because there was a prediction before, after accumulating energy, Wang Kaixian was pushed quite far. His body fiercely collided with the wall, and then he heard a muffled clang. If everything was normal, he could not stand up for at least 5 minutes. However, as he saw, the boy's body was shaking, as if nothing had happened just now, and he bounced up again. "Damn it!" Qin Hai cursed casually, his brain short-circuited by the sight in front of him. Faced with this indestructible Xiao Chang, he had to run. Qin Hai quickly rushed into the room without daring to delay, locking the door lock. He pulled all the necessary things such as tables, chairs, and bedside tables against the door, ensuring a moment of safety. He then rushed to the bed, unplugged his still-charging phone, and repeatedly called the alarm number several times. Only a busy tone came from the receiver, but he could not connect. In the face of danger, all he could do was seek help. Unable to make a phone call, Qin Hai had no choice but to go online. Suddenly, countless news and information flooded his phone screen, as if inexplicable violent incidents had occurred everywhere in Hengbei City overnight. Several urban areas were in chaos, and the last news headline was prominent and straightforward. "Please stay at home and don't go out. Suspected of rabies virus mutation, violent and manic after being bitten and bleeding. Shit, it's really his mother rabies." Qin Hai looked down at the arm he had just touched, and was sure that he was not injured. At this moment, Wang Kaixian was still banging against the door, and the sound was very harsh at night. It was almost impossible to leave through the door. Qin Hai looked at the window. Fortunately there was no anti-theft window installed. He pulled open the curtain, opened the valve on top, and with a hula sound, he opened the window. Only then did he realize that several lights were on in the distant building, and screams kept coming out. Qin Hai was considering how to safely get down from the 4th floor, and the door behind him was hit by a gap at a speed visible to the naked eye. Wang Kaixian could enter in less than a minute, and he couldn't help but choose. He carefully climbed down layer by layer with the air conditioning unit, and when he reached the 2nd floor, he slipped and fell into the vegetable field on the 1st floor, feeling the pain of his coccyx breaking. Qin Hai endured the pain and carefully observed the surrounding situation. He walked smoothly to Unit 2. At this moment, a dull sound came from behind him, accompanied by the dim light of the street lights in the community. He vaguely saw an object wriggling. Lying in bed, it turned out that Wang Kaixian jumped down from upstairs. His walking posture was very strange, and he couldn't stand completely straight. He arched his waist and placed his left leg on the ground in reverse, seemingly breaking his bone when he fell from the building. Chapter 2. Complete Fall, Searching for a Place to Stay. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Even so, Wang Kaixian did his best to run towards Qin Hai. Qin Hai suddenly understood that this is not a realistic version of The Walking Dead. If the whole play had been chased at that time, it might not be him who ran away now. Qin Hai's buttocks were very painful during activities, like someone pricking them with a needle, which greatly affected his speed. Even if he was trying to escape, he couldn't ignore this pain. It took him so long to reach the 1st unit. He turned his head to look at the several big trees next to him, thinking to climb up and avoid them for a while before speaking. At that moment, a woman suddenly rushed out of the second unit entrance, screaming to avoid the people chasing her behind him. However, as soon as he came out, he suddenly bumped into Wang Kaixian. At this moment, Wang Kaixian stopped chasing Qin Hai and grabbed the woman's mouth before starting to bite her. The woman's screams pierced through the night, but after a few sounds, there was no movement. Then, the person who was chasing her downstairs also came out and threw himself on the woman, sharing the night snack with Wang Kaixian. The woman's neck was torn apart, and her arm was now bitten like a pig's bones. In no time, blood and water from the open chest flowed all over the ground. Qin Hai was still silently crying for the woman in his heart, as if he had seen her body move in a daze. Sleeping trough, here. Yes, he didn't read it wrong. The woman's twisted body was trying to start, her head lost its grip, tilted to one side, and her entire arm was only left with a few thin pieces of meat hanging from her upper arm. The internal organs in her stomach occasionally fell out. At this moment, Qin Hai felt a nauseous sensation in his stomach, trying hard not to be disturbed, and all his energy pulled him back again. He calculated that if he didn't run at this speed, he really wouldn't have to run anymore, so he started looking for a nearby place to hide. Looking back, behind me is the property building of the community. There is a 3-story building with a kindergarten, property office, small supermarket, and community center of the street office. He turned on the flash on his phone, carefully walking up one step at a time, constantly looking around the environment, and raising his ears to determine the safe direction at any time. As soon as he arrived on the second floor, Qin Hai's heart pounded. This was a kindergarten, and there were teachers staying at night, so the iron door was locked. The upper floor was also full of kindergartens. He hurried to the wrong entrance, which was really troublesome. He had to go down and walk around to another door. As I walked to the door, there were 2 or 3 figures swaying under the street lamp not far away. Although I couldn't see who they were, based on my judgment, they should be Wang Kaixian and the others. Qin Hai was afraid that too much noise would catch their attention, so he quickly turned off his flashlight and looked left and right. He found an empty space under the stairs on the first floor and sneaked in. After going down, he saw clearly that this was an activity room where disabled people in the community often made handicrafts and then sold their belongings to raise funds for public welfare. Qin Hai prayed that the glass door was not locked, allowing him to enter and avoid it. Obviously, the prayer had failed again, but fortunately, the lock was not so strong here. With a forceful collision, he only heard a crisp sound of creak bang. The door slowly shifted a gap inward, and he crawled in sideways. Inside, there were neatly arranged tables, chairs, benches, and some tools and supplies. It was difficult to find a broom and some cloth strips and ropes through the dim light of the window. With the broom, it was placed horizontally on the glass door handle. When it was knocked open just now, the lock screw fell off, so it was impossible to lock the door. He brought a rope again, wrapped one end around the handle and the other end around the nearby heating pipe, and gently lifted a chair to top the door. This kind of empty and meaningless approach is actually useless. As long as the other party exerts enough force, it can be easily destroyed, but at least his heart can be comforted. After more than half an hour of tinkering, Qin Hai was so tired that he hid in a narrow storage room, took out his phone, and browsed through the news again. Relevant news flooded in like a tide, and all the media were reporting on the zombie siege. After opening the message, I saw that the lighting engineer Ding Cheng who took the photo with me yesterday sent many messages. He said that Wang Qian's arm was scratched by the iron wire on the reservoir while rescuing the dog yesterday. After returning home at night, she had a high fever that persisted. She went to the Second People's Hospital after 11 o'clock, and the doctor asked her to stay there. Tomorrow's shooting was cancelled. The general meaning of the next few pieces of information is that after Wang Qian was hospitalized, the doctor did not explain her condition, used antipyretic drugs that did not work, and before she finished infusion, she suddenly became extremely irritable, pulled off the needle on her hand, and finally bit the doctor. At first, Ding Cheng's voice carried a hint of mockery, saying that a woman like Wang Qian would not be favored by a wealthy father. It was simply too wild. Then, his tone became tense, and he said that the situation was not quite right. Not only did Wang Qian bite the doctor, but she also bit everyone standing close to her. The worst part was her assistant, the female assistant Ideal, who pulled her aside. Unexpectedly, Wang Qian bit into the assistant's neck, and the two of them pulled and fell into the nearby nurse station. The situation on site was almost crazy, and no one dared to step forward from the onlookers or medical staff. The nurse reported to the police first and then contacted the security room. 2 minutes later, a security guard holding a riot fork temporarily controlled her. Wang Qian's mouth and body were stained red with blood, and she kept yelling at everyone. The rest of the people quickly rescued the female assistant on the ground. At this point, she was already in a deep coma and covered in blood. A large hole was bitten on her neck, and the nurse helped cover the artery. After the doctor confirmed that she still had vital signs, she was about to be lifted onto the ambulance bed and sent for rescue when she saw the assistant's body constantly shaking. Everyone was frightened by this sudden state and held their breath, but no one dared to move. Her twisted and swaying body slowly stood up. In just a few seconds, her head lifted slightly, and her eyes were filled with red blood and gray-white pupils. Even the doctor has never seen such a sick state. When he wanted to ask, the assistant's behavior was exactly the same as that of Wang Qian before. She suddenly pounced on the doctor, and the security guard pulled them apart and once again used a riot fork to control the female assistant. When everyone thought it might be a type of rabies outbreak, the nurse next to her who was bitten also began to experience adverse reactions. The nurse vomited blood in a big gulp while falling down and convulsing. Ding Cheng roughly understood that only getting bitten can lead to infection. The last voice message said he had driven home, reminding Qin Hai not to go out casually and to be careful of getting infected. The voice came to an end, and Qin Hai's mind was filled with images as he listened. His heart was beating violently, and he felt his blood pressure constantly soaring. For a moment, he didn't know what to do or where to go. Hangbei City is the place where Qin Hai studied at university. Although there is still more than an hour before dawn, he decided to make a phone call to confirm the situation at home. After a few consecutive beeps, the phone was connected, and Qin's father's drowsy voice came out of the phone receiver, instantly reassuring him. Chapter 3. Studio is a good place. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After briefly explaining the situation here, take advantage of the fact that there is no zombie virus at home, quickly go to the supermarket to stock up on more food and water, repeatedly remind them not to go out casually, keep an eye on TV and online news, and try their best to hurry back as soon as possible. To be honest, after hearing the news about the safety of his family, Qin Hai felt a sense of security in his heart. The urge to rush home immediately became even stronger. As his tense nerves finally relaxed, he closed his eyes and fell into deep sleep. I don't know how long it took, but suddenly there was a loud impact outside. He stood up and gently pushed the door open, confirming the safety of the surroundings before walking out. Through the glass door, I saw a moving car colliding with another car in the nearby parking space. The hood of the car rolled up, and white smoke was emitted from the engine. The driver opened the door and rushed down, shoving 5 or 6 zombies. However, they were powerless and were soon pinned to the ground and unable to move. At around 4 o'clock in the morning, there were several times more pedestrians in the community, and 9 out of 10 had already been bitten by zombies and transformed. The sky is gradually getting brighter, but the number of people outside has increased the difficulty of escaping. Walking and running are too dangerous, and we need to find ways to use transportation. Qin Hai looked around and didn't find anything useful. Suddenly, he remembered the shared bike at the entrance of the community. Before leaving, I tied a lot of cloth strips on my hands and removed a few metal table legs. I quickly opened the door and ran towards the entrance of the community. Screams and cries for help were everywhere along the way, and the movement of running constantly attracted the surrounding zombies. More than 10 meters away was the entrance of the community, but the door was still locked. He looked at the gatepost, with bloodstains on both the window and the door. Helplessly, he could only climb out from the nearby low wall. However, as soon as he stepped on the wall, he was frightened by the scene outside and stood still. The vehicles on the road collided haphazardly, some caught fire in front of them, some overturned on the ground, and people ran around in panic. Strong men fought against zombies, while women with children fled to the roof and shouted. The elderly person was even more miserable as they were knocked down and gnawed on before taking a few steps. Qin Hai looked at the parking spot of the shared bike, about a few dozen steps away. He exerted all his strength and rushed to the front of the car in one breath. The sound of tapping the car seat to check the battery level caused many zombies to gather towards him. After finding a car and quickly scanning it with software, as soon as I got on board, a woman with long, wavy brown-red hair was seen in front of me. She was wearing a camisole nightgown, which seemed to have mutated from buying breakfast downstairs. Blood was still flowing in her mouth, her clothes were torn apart, and her meat was bitten to pieces. The woman opened her hands and was about to pounce. Qin Hai looked at the legs of the table in his hand, and after accumulating strength, he swung a round ball and hit her in the face. The woman was suddenly hit by the force and took a few steps back, unable to stand steady, and fell to the ground with a thud. Qin Hai dared not delay seeing the situation, threw away the stick with blood in his hand, got on the bike, twisted the handlebar, and rushed out with a whoosh. After finally getting rid of the densely populated family area and arriving on the main road, he found that the area was fine with not many zombies. After riding at full speed for 40 minutes, Qin Hai arrived near the high-speed railway station. When you are far away, you can see that the high-speed rail station is completely under martial law, all separated by iron fences, and the LED display screen next to it repeatedly plays the situation explanation. The general meaning is that a deadly virus has emerged in Hengbei City, and the affected individuals are very sensitive to sound. It is best not to go out at home. Once bitten, it is important to remain calm and the hospital will provide maximum treatment to the patient. In order to avoid the spread of the virus, all transportation outside Hengbei City will be stopped from now on. High-speed trains, buses, highways, etc. will be suspended, and the travel time will be notified separately. It's over now, the entire city is quarantined, and Qin Hai's plan is completely hopeless. At this point, I am already in a homeless state. The house I rented before jumped out of the window, and without a key, I would definitely not be able to enter. Fortunately, there is still one day to consider, and I won't be able to go anywhere after dark. Qin Hai doesn't have many acquaintances in this city, so he thought of Ding Cheng. After the phone was answered, Ding Cheng said he was not at home, but in a studio on the outskirts of the city. The studio is located in the northern suburbs of the city. Previously, it was converted from a small warehouse and sold along with the land in a standard parts factory due to poor business. Although Ding Cheng was just a lighting engineer in the filming team, his family background was quite privileged, and most of the filming work was done with his face. Ding Cheng's father has always been doing business in Southeast Asia. He originally bought this place to store wood, but for some reason it didn't work. Ding Cheng thought the terrain was good, so he decided to come and open his studio. Qin Hai had come to this place once before, and everything was good, but it was a bit desolate. The main reason was that he had become accustomed to staying in the crowd for a long time. Now, when he saw the 3-meter-high iron fence around the house, he couldn't express his sense of security. Qin Hai felt that it was a bit inappropriate to live in this way. Along the way, most of the shops on the street were closed. Finally, he saw 1 or 2 shops being looted and opened wide. He quietly watched for a moment at the door and rushed in to pick up some things. The studio has not been decorated much, and the empty lobby is filled with food and drinks, just like the ones in the supermarket. Qin Hai smiled a bit embarrassed, but Ding Cheng was quite generous, saying that it is not easy to buy things in this state. Then he said that a few friends also want to come over. In no time, 3 luxury cars parked outside were all his wealthy second-generation friends. These children are not much different from left-behind children. Their parents are busy with business and have no time to pay attention to them. After the zombie virus outbreak, they can't stay at home, so they might as well gather together. 4 people got off 3 cars, 2 men and 2 women. Each person picked up a few bags of things and 5 suitcases from the car. This battle was like going on vacation abroad, not like taking refuge. They introduced each other, and Qin Hai always couldn't remember other people's names clearly, always making mistakes about who was who. He used to use features to remember, such as Wang Qian, who had a small bump on her nose before, adding a finishing touch to her overall appearance. The 4 people this time are also quite easy to distinguish, among which the tallest boy Zhang Weiming and the shortest girl Yi Yi are a pair of lovers, and the other Qin Kuan and Han Fuiying are also a pair. They were all classmates in middle and high school, and their parents knew each other, so their relationship was good. After the introduction, a few people started playing mobile games on the sofa. Qin Hai was bored and his eyes scanned Qin Kuan, who was not very recognizable. The reason why people could remember him at a glance was because of his legs. Chapter 4. Danger in Approaching. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Qin Kuan had a cast on his leg. It was said that he accidentally fell yesterday. When he got off the car, Qin Hai even stepped forward to help, but looking at the wrapped white gauze, he inexplicably felt a little fear in his heart. Apart from Ding Cheng's bed, there are no extra bedrooms in the studio, just rooms stacked with miscellaneous items one by one. Photographers usually have black equipment storage boxes, which are very sturdy but have a small area. Qin Hai randomly picked 2 and put them together, about 1 meter wide, so sleeping alone is not a problem. After dinner, everyone played landlord and werewolf for a while, and Qin Hai felt drowsy. After a brief wash, he went upstairs to rest. When he woke up, he heard people talking and laughing downstairs. When Qin Hai was sleeping, he had habits of being silent and disconnected from the internet. It was estimated that he woke up 2 to 3 hours later and stretched lazily to read a few news articles before realizing that the virus was spreading very quickly. Currently, there was no effective medicine, and the number of infected people continued to rise. In simple terms, the number of zombies was almost uncontrollable, and the rest of the content left him shocked, with goosebumps layer by layer. The small and dark room made people feel very oppressive, and he regained consciousness and was ready to go downstairs for a walk. As soon as I left the room, I saw a mess downstairs. Last night, I threw everything I had eaten and played on the ground. Ding Cheng and Zhang Weiming were still sleeping soundly on the sofa, and the 2 girls were not here. Qin Kuan didn't see it, so he probably went back to the room with his girlfriend. This morning was even colder and quieter than usual. Qin Hai stood in the yard, gazing out at the surrounding factories, thinking to himself that it was the same when he came last time. Although the factory was working normally, there was no sound or anyone in sight. Anyway, he was also idle at the moment. He walked around the iron fence and repeatedly confirmed whether it was safe or not. Halfway through, I saw a figure not far away. Looking at the silhouette of his body in the obvious white gauze on his legs, isn't this Qin Kuan? Why are you standing here early in the morning? Qin Hai was hesitating whether to come forward and say hello when he suddenly moved around and continued walking towards the back of the house. Qin Hai quietly followed behind, and after taking a few steps, Qin Kuan seemed to feel someone behind him and suddenly turned around to look. I had a headache after drinking too much yesterday, and you got up quite early, Qin Kuan said first. I'm used to it, often starting work at 4 or 5 in the morning, Qin Hai agreed. After chatting a few more casually, Qin Kuan said that the weather was a bit cold and he should go back to the house first. At the moment when Qin Kuan turned around, a light seemed to flash in Qin Hai's eyes. This sudden light quickly arranged and combined in just 3 seconds, generating countless possibilities. Qin Hai stood still, constantly self-identifying, denying, and recognizing. He slowly turned back to look at the back of Chen Kun as he left. That's right, his leg was very normal, and he couldn't tell that he had fallen to a bone fracture and needed to use a cane. Is it difficult for young people to develop not only energy but also the speed of bone healing? This is too exaggerated. It's not a big joke, but it's not scientific at all. There is only one truth. Chen Kun's leg is not even injured. As soon as this idea arose, Qin Hai unconsciously shuddered. It's almost noon, and everyone is sitting in the living room preparing for lunch. Chen Kun started talking too early and suddenly felt a bit sleepy. He went back to catch up and said he had to go upstairs. Actually, everyone could tell that Chen Kun was not quite right. His expression was a bit unnatural, his face darkened, and he spoke weakly. His girlfriend Han Fuiying was about to come forward and care for a few words, but was rejected. During lunchtime, everyone talked about their own experiences during the virus outbreak. Ding Cheng said that he saw Wang Qian's mutated appearance and level of violence after biting her assistant with his own eyes. He felt that the virus transmitted from person to person was very scary, and that the small high-rise he lived in was unsafe, so he decided to move to the studio. After seeing the news, Zhang Weiming and Yi Yi decisively chose to leave this city. Like Qin Hai, they were informed at the high-speed railway station that they could not leave Hengbei City temporarily, even if their parents' relationship was used, it was still ineffective. Han Fuiying said that she and Chen Kun were playing outside respectively at that time. She sang K with her sisters until early in the morning. After that, she was going to the bar to find Chen Kun, but as soon as she went out, she heard the scene of ambulance and police car whistling. Her first reaction was that something had happened, but Chen Kun could not contact her all the time. She went home first. What about Chen Kun? Qin Hai was curious to know if he had encountered a zombie attack. Later, Kunzi replied to me with a message saying that she had safely arrived home, said Han Fuiying. What's wrong with his leg? Qin Hai continued to ask. Han Fuiying explained that the table for playing at the old street bar where Chen Kun went to play was very high. Chen Kun drank too much and insisted on going up to sing a song, but accidentally fell out of nowhere. After being sent to the hospital, the doctor said that the bone on his ankle was a bit cracked. After getting cast, he went straight home. Qin Hai and Ding Cheng immediately became alert when they heard the word hospital and quickly blurted out which hospital Chen Kun was staying at. Han Fuiying said it was a municipal traditional Chinese medicine hospital, and then they relaxed. Talking like this until after 4 p.m., there was no sound from Chen Kun upstairs. Qin Hai was a bit worried. After all, Wang Kaishuan's crazy appearance always lingered in his mind, and his current state was like a frightened bird, unable to tolerate any possibility. Speaking of which, Han Fuiying seemed to feel that she didn't care enough about her boyfriend, so she suggested going upstairs to see Chen Kun. She had just gone up for a while when suddenly a scream of fear came from the room. They looked at each other and quickly ran upstairs. Upon opening the door, a bloody gauze was casually discarded on the ground, and the plaster on Chen Kun's leg was also removed and thrown aside. Han Fuiying nervously stared at Chen Kun lying motionless on the bed. At this moment, Qin Hai saw that there were also large patches of blood on the bed, with a dark red and black color that appeared to be sprayed out. It was likely that the blood was coming from Chen Kun's mouth, and there were also many remnants of black blood at the corners of his mouth. Chen Kun's expression was painful, and he wanted to struggle but lacked strength all over. He muttered something in his mouth, not knowing what to say. When Ding Cheng saw this, he wanted to come forward and help him up, but was stopped by Han Fuiying. Han Fuiying trembled and said, "Look at his neck." With the flow, everyone looked over and saw that the large blood vessels on Chen Kun's neck were abnormally swollen, like black veins attached to his skin, intertwined until he reached his forehead, looking very terrifying. He's not going to become a zombie, is he? Yi asked softly. After hearing this, Zhang Weiming's eyes widened and he said, I've chased after walking corpses before. When dealing with zombies, I have to blow my head. Han Fuiying heard that she was going to take action against her boyfriend and extended her arms in front of everyone, saying, no, he's just sick. He hasn't been bitten by a zombie. Article 5. The true cause of Qin's leg injury. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Han Fuiying is right. If you haven't been bitten, you won't mutate. After all, this is just a disease at present, and you can't draw conclusions to harm anyone. But Qin Hai was still very afraid in his heart. He took advantage of others not paying attention and picked up the tripod standing by the door, hiding it behind him to be on the safe side. Ding Cheng thought for a moment and said, Wang Qian bit the assistant, and the assistant bit the nurse again. They were only separated by less than 5 minutes. Kunzi came yesterday, and it has been almost 24 hours. If it were to mutate, it would have changed long ago. The others nodded in agreement with Ding Cheng's statement. Ding Cheng gently stepped forward and touched Qin Kuan's feet, only to see that although his eyes were lifeless, there were no gray-white eyeballs. At this moment, everyone's anxious hearts also relaxed, and Han Fuiying quickly stepped forward to support him, letting him lie flat on the blanket. A few minutes later, Qin Kuan gradually regained consciousness. He was still talking incessantly, and Ding Cheng leaned forward on his face, finally listening to the content of the words. Qin Kuan kept repeating, I don't want to die, help me, help me. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone was at a loss and didn't understand why Qin Kuan said so. Han Fuiying anxiously called for help while Ding Cheng continued to ask him what was wrong and if he had ever had any illness before. Qin Kuan slowly pulled up the blanket wrapped around his leg with his hand. Previously, he said that the leg with a bone fracture was exposed, and it was unknown whether the bones inside had been injured, but the surface skin looked a mess. The skin seems to have been scratched by something, with several deep and long bloodstains constantly oozing black blood. The surrounding flesh is flushed, and off-white liquid flows out from the folds. It should be pus from the inflamed wound, which looks both disgusting and shocking. At this point, Qin Kuan openly recounted the source of the wound. It turned out to be the night before yesterday, but in fact, Qin Kuan didn't fall in a bar. He played until early in the morning and left the bar. When he was about to drive away, he saw a girl standing next to the car wearing revealing clothes, with her front and back protruding, supporting his car and vomiting. After chatting for a while, the two of them went to open a room. While playing, the girl suddenly scratched his leg with her nails, which made him feel that the girl's emotions were not quite right. He just walked away and the wound on her leg became more and more painful, until he couldn't bear it and went to the hospital. After seeking medical treatment, the doctor didn't say anything, just gave him a shot of tetanus. When he got home, Qin Kuan read the news and found out that a virus with super strong infectivity and no specific medicine had erupted, which mentioned the possibility of mutation in bites and scratches. He was very worried, but he couldn't be 100% sure that the girl he met must have carried the virus. Later, because he wanted to come here, in order to avoid causing panic, he deliberately cast a plaster to cover up the fact. Although it seems that Qin Kuan's behavior is truly despicable, such selfish behavior is common. The virus suddenly appeared, and no one expected it, let alone had no experience in dealing with it. It is normal to slack off and ignore it. During the listening process, Han Fuiying's emotions changed accordingly, but she was working hard to control it. After all, in Qin Kuan's current situation, she couldn't bear to worry about anything anymore. Faced with Qin Kuan's illness, everyone was at a loss. At this moment, the emergency call was finally connected, and medical personnel are currently very scarce. The rescue speed can basically be ignored as usual. What can be done now is to first isolate suspected cases, take good self-protection measures, and do as much as possible under the conditions. If a patient falls ill, remember to stay away from the patient. After all, it's just a matter of time. Helplessly, Ding Cheng temporarily locked Qin Hai in the room, and no one was allowed to enter or exit. The remaining 5 people discussed face-to-face how to solve the current problem and ultimately agreed on a feasible solution. First, go to the pharmacy to buy anti-inflammatory and antibacterial drugs and alcohol, and then buy some sturdy ropes, riot forks, and other tools for emergencies. After that, everyone starts to split up and take action. Zhang Weiming and Yi Yi teamed up, Qin Hai went out alone, and Ding Cheng and Han Fuiying stayed at home to watch over Qin Hai. Each person wore Bluetooth earphones to turn on the call function and report their own situation at any time. Qin Hai's driver's license was taken when he was in college. Although it had been over 3 years, he had not touched the steering wheel once, and his emotions couldn't help but rise after starting the car. The things to buy are mostly on the main streets of the city, and all the shops along the street have locked doors. There are no people on the road, and even the traffic lights are not on, which is great for beginners like him. The car was slowly driving on the street, and occasionally 3 to 5 ragged clothes swayed around the roadside, with zombies covered in dried blood, making low growls resembling wild beasts at the cicadas chirping in the trees. One could only see his mouth open but couldn't make a sound. Upon closer inspection, his throat was bitten open, and the flesh on his chest was shattered and attached to the collar of his T-shirt. The car hadn't driven far yet, and there were many vehicles parked in the middle of the road, blocking Qin Hai's path. He put on the handbrake and stretched his neck to look forward. These cars collided and couldn't move. He gently opened the car door, looked around to make sure it was safe, and then went down to look for other ways to pass through this road. "What's your situation?" Ding Cheng's voice came from the Bluetooth earphones. "The pharmacies on the roads of Zhejiang, Xiangjiang, and Songshan are all closed. What should we do?" Yi Yi's voice appeared somewhat panicked. Qin Hai couldn't help but admire that the old driver was really impressive, running so far in just over 10 minutes. "Where's Qin Hai?" "I'm stuck here," Qin Hai replied. After hesitating for a moment, Ding Cheng told everyone to hurry up and come back before it gets dark. If they can't get those supplies, there's nothing they can do. Everything should prioritize their own safety. His words carried a sense of helplessness, which made Qin Hai's heart ache. He recalled the current situation of Qin Hai, the direct confrontation with Wang Kaixian that night, and the blocked city. After living for more than 30 years, he felt a glimmer of despair for the first time. He patted his face and tried to maintain his combat effectiveness. Although his previous days were dull, since he was alive, he had to give his all to survive. "Being single, I used to spend every day earning money and paying rent, going against my conscience to maintain my financial father, dealing with relationships with partners, and so on. But now all I have to do is live. Thinking about it, I suddenly feel much more relaxed." The congested road was endless, and Qin Hai didn't want to waste time here. Just as he was about to turn around and get in, the door of a black off-road vehicle that was surrounded in the middle suddenly opened with a loud bang, making the surroundings very quiet. He was stunned by the noise, wondering if there was anyone inside the car who had not been infected. 3 seconds later, a little girl got off the car. Chapter 6. Caught in a desperate situation while buying medicine. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The girl was wearing a red and black checkered skirt, and her sandals were stepping on the ground, making a jingling music sound. The soles of her shoes were also shining with red light. The girl got off the car and stood with her back facing him, her head tilted to the right of her body, unsure of the child's appearance because she couldn't see her face. "That." Qin Hai gently probed and called the girl. The girl ignored and continued to stand still. "Child, are you okay?" Perhaps this time, Qin Hai's voice increased by 2 degrees, and the girl's hanging fingers moved, making a slight moan in her mouth, but the sound was too low to hear clearly. Qin Hai saw that the girl could speak and judged that she should be a normal person, so he took 2 steps forward. Just as he was about to approach, Zhang Weiming's voice suddenly came from his earphones. Not good. We're trapped. Help me, Qin Hai was completely engrossed in staring at the little girl in front of him, whose life and death were unknown. The sudden shout startled him and made him tremble all over. Where are you now? I'll go find you. Their words were mixed with current and noise, making it difficult to hear clearly. They could only hear some park property, and the noise was getting louder and louder. Qin Hai's ears couldn't bear it, so he pulled off his headphones. Qin Hai took out his phone from his pocket and was about to call it back when the girl in front of him had already turned around. He lifted his eyes and met the girl's 4 eyes. The girl's eyeballs were grayish-white, with bloodshot eyes. Half of her left neck to shoulder was bitten off, revealing a white bone that seemed to have been sliced off. Her chin had no flesh left, and even with her mouth closed, the blood-red black hole in front of her mouth was still like an open, bloody mouth. Seeing such a scene, Qin Hai couldn't help but tremble in his heart, his mind blank, and he didn't know how to react. Even if Wang Kaixian threw himself in front of him that night, he didn't feel the terrifying shock of staring at him at this moment. Qin Hai worked hard to adjust his breathing, calming down his pounding heart and moving backwards with the smallest possible step, hoping not to catch the little girl's attention. Just 2 or 3 steps out, let out a roar. The little girl in front of him was like a hungry beast, unable to wait anymore to accelerate and charge towards him. At this moment, the speed was so fast that it was impossible to tell that she was just a child. In just a few steps, she tripped over the debris on the ground and fell to the ground. Then, she jumped up with her hands and feet and used a monkey that looked like a returning ancestor to open its teeth and dance its claws, pouncing forward. Thanks to the time difference of a few tenths of a second, Qin Hai had safely boarded the car and locked the doors, but the windows had not yet been closed. He breathed a long sigh of relief, grateful that the girl was only over 1 meter tall. Although she leaned forward with her hands on the car window, her body struggled outside. The chaotic noise of roaring, tapping, and scratching the car body was like a magnet. In just 1 or 2 minutes, the surrounding zombies began to gather. Without hesitation, Qin Hai quickly took off the sunshade and pushed it back against her head, then the car window closed smoothly. A series of actions such as starting the engine, releasing the handbrake, shifting into reverse gear, and stepping on the accelerator were completed in one go. Under the roar, the car rushed out and headed back onto the road. At this moment, Ding Cheng called and said that Zhang Weiming and Yi couldn't be contacted, so he asked Qin Hai to leave and go back quickly. Looking out at the sky through the windshield, the sun has already set in the west, and the entire city is about to enter darkness. Ding Cheng was worried that it would be too dangerous to be outside in the dark, but he was also conflicted in his heart. It was uncertain where Zhang Weiming and his companions were trapped, and whether they could escape tonight was still unknown. Although spending less than 48 hours with them, it was simply too easy for Qin Hai to just ignore them, which was just a matter of direction. He couldn't get through this mental hurdle. Because he knew that one day he would also be thrown into a corner, waiting for darkness to engulf him, savoring the taste of being abandoned. If there was really a possibility, of course, he hoped that someone would appear, and now, he is their hope. According to Zhang Weiming's final address, which had 4 disjointed words, park, property, and combined with the route they were on at the time, Qin Haiming's crazy analysis suggests that it should be Tianqin Park located on Jiujiang Road. This is a community, and the property building is not far north from the west gate of the community. If you guessed correctly, they should be hiding nearby at this moment. This living area covers a large number of residential areas, with at least 1,000 households in Tianqin Park alone. Once there are zombies, the number will definitely not be small. Qin Hai searched one storefront room after another and saw that the gate pole at the entrance of Tianqin Park was broken by a collision, and many wire fences were reinforced on the guardrail. It was obvious that the residents had taken self-rescue measures, but it was basically of no use. Qin Hai is now unarmed, with no one in his hand, and his heart is even more uncertain. After looking around, he saw a wooden sign that was over 1 meter long and over 20 centimeters wide hanging on the broken wire mesh under the railing. It appeared to be a sign pulled out of the roadside green belt. He forcefully pulled it down, grabbed it in his hand, and walked into the community. Just as he walked out more than 10 meters, he felt something bump on his shoulder behind him. He suddenly turned back, but there was no one behind him. Then he looked down and found a pile of paper. At this moment, I saw the nearest building to him. On the balcony of the 3rd floor, there was an aunt in her 50s who was kneading a ball of paper and throwing it at him again, gesturing to pick it up. Qin Hai opened it and saw a few words written inside. Looking for someone. Qin Hai nodded at his aunt. After a moment, he opened the 3rd paper ball she threw over. Property building, southernmost, with 1 man and 1 woman, many dogs. 1 man and 1 woman should refer to Zhang Weiming and Yi Yi. Dogs are zombies, after all, going crazy is like a symptom of rabies. Auntie should have seen their specific hiding places. Although we already know, we still cannot act rashly. There are anti-theft windows inside the building. If we are trapped, it is difficult to escape solely by our own abilities. As Qin Hai tried to figure out a way, he kept an eye out for the surroundings and suddenly remembered that this thing seemed to be very sensitive to sound. It was better to use a different approach. Qin Hai tied his phone with the iron wire on the fence and fixed it on a nearby tree. After turning on the voice intelligence mode, he turned around and arrived at the property building. As the aunt said, all the zombies in the entire building gathered in the 3rd floor corridor, tightly blocking the southernmost room. The zombies kept hitting the door with their bodies, trying to get in, while a few who hadn't squeezed in shook their bodies near the staircase. At this moment, the heart rate, blood pressure, and renal hormones are about to peak, indicating that a fierce battle is inevitable. Qin Hai let out a soft growl at the zombies, and the nearest few turned their heads to look at him. But then they turned back and didn't come towards him as expected. It seemed that the sound of knocking at the door was more attractive than expected. Qin Hai cleared his throat and raised his tone to shout at them again, "Hi, kids." Chapter 7. Fortunately, I brought my brain when I went out. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This voice was full of vitality, with a strong and magnetic range that made his Adam's apple tremble. All the movements in the hallway were suppressed by this sound, and there seemed to be some echoes. Then, the zombies' movements paused for a second before turning around and rushing towards him. Seeing this, Qin Hai took 3 steps and 2 steps, running and jumping down the stairs, running to the vicinity of his phone and shouting at it, "Phone butler, play music." I only heard a mechanized and gentle female voice answering from the microphone, "Okay, we're playing music for you." In order to relieve stress, Qin Hai usually listens to songs mainly rock music. The thought of dynamic and rhythmic music that can lure away all the zombies made him extremely excited. But after waiting for 2 or 3 seconds, there was no sound from his phone, and his mind went buzzing before he panicked. It's broken, the phone is silent. He turned around and saw several zombies rushing out from behind. In the midst of life and death, he once again shouted at his phone, "Phone manager, open it and release it." "Okay, we are turning on the external playback function for you." Listening to the song playing as scheduled, my heart suddenly felt a lot more at ease. The zombie, who had been turned by his own roar, rushed towards his phone again. He squatted on the ground and leaned against the flower bushes at the door, slowly moving out, and then quickly ran up to the 3rd floor. At present, the corridor is relatively safe except for the blood stains attached to the walls and ground. Qin Hai ran to the south gate at the end and called inside towards the crack of the door. At first, he did not receive a response and was extremely anxious. He occasionally looked downstairs and saw that the zombies were accumulating more and more, so he had to forcefully knock on the door a few times. "Open the door quickly, I'm Qin Hai." After speaking, he leaned over the door and listened to the commotion inside the room. With a snap, the door flashed open with a small crack, and Zhang Weiming revealed half of his face. After taking a glance, he immediately opened the door and pulled Yi out. Zhang Weiming looked carefully at the long corridor behind him and asked with a puzzled expression, "Why did you come? Let's talk about it later. Now is not the time to explain. The duck egg yolk hanging in the sky will soon completely sink into the horizon." They understood what Qin Hai meant, and the three of them looked back and walked out of the property building. Qin Hai parked his car on the road north of the community, with the car door unlocked, just in case he was chased and could run away without turning around. The three of them had just walked to the main entrance when Qin Hai glanced at about 20 zombies surrounding the tree, constantly trying to grab the phone hanging on it. Seeing this scene, although I feel completely under control, I feel that something is a bit strange but I can't say it. I psychologically suggest to myself, let's just run away and talk about it. But at that moment, the music on his phone suddenly stopped, and in that moment, he finally realized why he had felt something was wrong just now. It turned out that what came from his phone was not the sound of songs, but the ringtone. No wonder it sounded so familiar to him. Once the phone calls, the song being played will be forced to stop and require a new command to continue. The movements of the zombies also froze in place as the music stopped. They turned their faces and raised their ears, trying to search for nearby sound sources. Now, the three of them were only a few steps away from the zombies, and no one dared to act recklessly. Qin Hai gestured to them with his eyes to look at the position of the car, then gently took out the key from his pocket. Qin Hai took a deep breath and quickly threw the key at them, then loudly said to them, "The car door is not locked, go around to the south gate of the community to pick me up." After speaking, the zombies suddenly turned around and rushed towards them with their teeth and claws open. Zhang Weiming and Yi rushed towards the car without hesitation. Qin Hai turned around and ran into the community, shouting while running. Except for the 2 or 3 who were chasing them, all the remaining black corpses followed behind Qin Hai. The ant on the balcony saw the whole process and anxiously shouted at him, "Run away, young man." Qin Hai glanced at her and didn't have time to answer her. He just made a thank you gesture and climbed up the fence of the community, jumping out from it again. Zombies lack intelligence and cannot think. They are just mechanically attacking forward, so they cannot be flipped out, let alone know how to wrap around them. Qin Hai, who jumped out, ran to the tree and pulled off his phone. The missed call was from Ding Cheng, who must have wanted to know his situation. He ran all the way from the west gate to the vicinity of the south gate and saw Zhang Weiming, who had been waiting for him for a long time. After jumping onto the passenger seat, he stepped on the gas pedal and the three of them were completely out of danger. At this point, the sky was completely dark, but fortunately the street lights were still on normally. The congestion of vehicles during the rush hour was unbearable, and the bustle of the streets was completely gone. My mood suddenly became extremely heavy. "How did you know we were on the 3rd floor?" Zhang Weiming asked out his confusion just now. "Ah. It's broken." Qin Hai patted his thigh before realizing that the ant was still upstairs and couldn't take her with him, which made him feel extremely guilty. Qin Hai sighed and waved his hand, "How are you, haven't you been bitten?" Zhang Weiming shook his head and said, "I originally saw a nearby store door half open. After entering, I found that it was full of zombies, and then ran out. At that time, I was only trying to escape, but I didn't know where I had gone." After Zhang Weiming finished speaking about the general situation, he looked at the rearview mirror and asked if Yi was okay. Yi was frightened and sat in the back of the car, nodding and answering, "I'm okay." After speaking, she softened all over and lay down again. This trip came empty-handed, and Zhang Weiming found it inconvenient to drive. He asked Qin Hai to let Ding Cheng know. As soon as the phone was connected and before he could speak, the other person's voice rushed out of the microphone. Unexpectedly, this shout was so sudden that he hung up his phone and didn't let Qin Hai throw it out. It turned out that Qin was unable to hold on and had completely mutated. Ordinary disinfectants and other drugs were definitely ineffective. Ding Cheng instructed him to open the door and not rush in when he returned. When Qin went crazy in the room, he was locked outside by Ding Cheng, but the gate was still locked. Therefore, he should be somewhere in the yard at this moment. The car was parked to the west of the studio. Looking from a distance, there was only one light emitting a faint light in the studio. The yard was unusually quiet, and the specific location of Qin is still uncertain. Qin Hai asked Zhang Weiming to turn on the car lights, instantly illuminating the entire wall, but still couldn't see his trace. Waiting like this was not a solution. As usual, I'll go out and lead Qin out to the northeast corner now. Take the opportunity to rush back to the room, Qin Hai urged after looking around. What will you do? Yi asked. To be honest, Qin Hai didn't know what to do next. Let's talk about it. That's the decision. Call Ding Cheng and let him pick you up. Speaking, Qin Hai got off the car with his phone and arrived at the designated location with ease. Chapter 8. Crisis After Crisis. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. This corner railing is double layered with less decoration, making it easier to grab and step on when climbing. Qin Hai looked inside through the fence, but didn't see anything. Then he lightly tapped the music playback button, and the silence of the night was instantly pierced, with a strong sense of rhythm pouring out like a tide. At present, he had no mood to listen to the music and was focused on searching for Qin's figure within his sight. At this moment, a series of creaking noises came from behind the house, and Qin's arm leaned against the iron railing, sliding towards him. After a few steps, Qin began to gather strength and leaped out of the darkness, coming to his sight. Fortunately, he was separated by the railing, otherwise this speed would definitely be unavoidable. After the mutation, Qin's pale face was covered with black blood vessels, his eyes seemed to be coated with a layer of gray-white frosted film, his mouth opened and closed to the maximum extent, and he kept yelling at Qin Hai. His whole face was pressed against the fence, and there was a clear wound on the left forehead that had been hit. It should be that Ding Cheng had taken some measures after discovering his illness, but it seemed to have had no effect. Qin's face was ferocious, his movements increasing in amplitude and strength, causing the iron railings to shake slightly. Qin Hai's position was temporarily safe, and he glanced at Ding Cheng and his companions, only to see Ding Cheng supporting the door frame and revealing half of his head. Qin Hai turned his head and shouted to Zhang Weiming and the others to run quickly. The two of them rushed into the room at full speed, and then with a loud bang, the door closed safely. Now it was time to think about how to escape. Just as Ding Cheng was about to use his phone's position again to divert Qin's attention, he came to a window not far from Qin and opened his phone to play music. Qin Hai instantly understood his intention and turned off the music. Qin bit into the air a few times and ran along with Ding Cheng in another place. Now, Qin Hai was running towards the opposite direction of the entrance. Just as he was about to enter the room, another face suddenly appeared. This sudden situation was completely unexpected for Qin Hai. He didn't have time to brake and couldn't hit the man. He dodged and flipped to the right, stumbled and didn't stand firm, and fell to the ground. Before he could fully recover, the man grabbed his pants and stretched his arm, ready to embrace him. Qin Hai looked up at him, and under the light of the car lights, the man appeared unusually tall. His face, which was deformed and ferocious, kept opening and closing its mouth, making biting movements. It must have been because the movement of the phone earlier was too loud, attracting scattered zombies nearby. Qin Hai flashed his eyes and, as expected, the man followed a dozen or so zombies, all slowly surrounding the house in search of their voices. Now, without much thought, he put all his strength on his right leg and kicked the man's thigh with a bang, pushing him back a few steps. Taking advantage of this time, he suddenly jumped up from the ground and ran into the yard, slamming the door shut. Qin Hai was clutching the iron chain with both hands, trying to lock the door. Before he could finish his circle, the group of zombies approached him. The zombies reached out and frantically grabbed each other. Zhang Weiming opened the door and shouted to Qin Hai, "Don't worry about that, come in quickly." Qin Hai had no choice but to release the door lock, turn around, and run back into the room. The thrilling and varied experiences just now made Qin Hai feel exhausted, and his heart seemed to be about to jump out of his chest in the next second. Fortunately, as he temporarily returned to safety, Qin Hai's legs softened and he sat on the ground, unable to stand up. "Are you okay? Have you been bitten?" Ding Cheng asked with concern. Qin Hai shook his head slightly, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Taking advantage of the break, everyone began to review their own experiences. Ding Cheng said that after more than an hour of others going out, he heard that there was no movement inside Chen Kuan's house, so he opened the door through a gap and looked inside. Han Fuiying, standing on tiptoe behind her, stretched her neck and looked inside, but did not see anyone on the bed. Han Fuiying whispered to Ding Cheng where he had gone. Just as they were wondering, the door handle was suddenly pulled back with a strong force. "I didn't expect that people would live here, let alone be used for isolation, so I didn't have a strong lock installed. His mother, I knew this, and I should have built it according to the bunker of the fighting nation to prevent nuclear weapons," Ding Cheng said angrily. Upon seeing Chen Kuan's mutation, Ding Cheng reacted quickly and picked up Han Fuiying, running to a warehouse downstairs where filming tools were stored. There were almost defensive measures such as slides, radio poles, and tripods inside. A moment later, Chen Kuan broke into the door. In order to protect themselves, they could only pick up the guy in their hands and fight against him. Chen Kuan's forehead was also broken by Ding Cheng at that time. The three of them were defeated after a few minutes of confrontation. After all, the other party was completely insane and unstoppable. Helplessly, they flipped out the window and cooperated with each other, leading Chen Kuan to the courtyard outside, then locked the door and closed the window. Observing for a moment, it was discovered that Chen Kuan, who had mutated, could not open the door or windows with his hands. He could only stand in front of the window and scream urgently, but did not know how to flip into the window sill that was not very high. At this point, Han Fuiying's eyes turned red and tears couldn't stop flowing. Yi hugged her and said some comforting words. Although the cause of Chen Kuan's infection was not honorable, there were not many people who could rely on each other in such a special situation. Now everyone has had the experience of facing zombies directly and has a preliminary understanding. Let's summarize a few points together. Firstly, after mutation, their eyes have become grayish-white, so they cannot see anything and can only distinguish the direction of their prey through sound and smell, just like mosquitoes are interested in carbon dioxide in human body fluids and sweat. Secondly, they have lost the ability to use tools and physical movements such as opening, closing, twisting, flipping, and climbing, and are even less agile than the apes that evolved millions of years ago. Thirdly, all purposes prioritize food and will actively attack any living and mobile creature. Finally, the onset time of infection is uncertain, perhaps due to the tetanus shot by Chen Kuan, or the differences between human bodies. It is not immediately mutated after being bitten or scratched. At least one thing is beyond doubt, which is that cross-infection between blood causes a 100% disease rate. At this point, I finally saw deep sadness and seriousness on everyone's faces. Who could have imagined that they had become characters on TV? So far, what can be confirmed is that the spread of the virus is faster than they imagined, and prevention and control measures have not been proportional to it, especially in densely populated communities where the situation is even worse. 2 days before the incident broke out, the sound of fire trucks and emergency vehicles honking their horns was often heard, perhaps to attract more zombies. Now, all day outside, except for the chirping of insects and birds, there is no other sound. Chapter 9. Opening the Escape from the City Plan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. They started to divide their work, taking turns on night shifts every night to detect problems in a timely manner. Fortunately, the amount of food is enough for everyone to hold on for a week. To avoid any unforeseen circumstances, Qin Hai suggests storing water and electricity in advance. When directors and photographers go out to shoot, they sometimes encounter weather with inappropriate lighting. Post-production photo editing is a solution, and of course, lighting is also a solution. Especially when shooting night scenes, the requirements for lighting are higher. Therefore, there are many batteries here, and they are all large capacity. If there is water, it is necessary to fill all containers. Although the zombies in the yard keep breathing in the air every day, searching for sounds to bite. For 2 consecutive days, there was a huge noise from helicopters passing by, and the zombie swarm moved along. It never appeared again, and the surroundings once again returned to a scattered state. There was no threat to them for the time being, so they lived peacefully for 2 days. That night, the distant street lights did not light up at a fixed time, and the speed of the data network and wireless broadband was unstable. Although the news was overwhelming, there was no new progress except for reporting on the event. Perhaps this is a precursor to the depletion of resources. Waiting like this, the mood became even heavier and more agonizing. Everyone began to plan for the long term. The 2 girls wanted to stay in Hengbei City, thinking that as long as they waited, there would be hope. And Ding Cheng suggested leaving. Qin Hai's desire to go home has long taken off, but he doesn't know what kind of outcome he will face after making his choice, so he hasn't expressed his opinion yet. Zhang Weiming couldn't make up his mind for a moment and could only choose to stay or leave based on the development of the situation. The quiet night was shattered by the rustling sound, and Qin Hai opened his eyes in a daze. There was a person standing in the corridor with his back facing him, who was lying on the railing, his clothes hanging on and unable to break free. The silhouette looked like Ding Cheng, but the person's body was hunched and uncertain. Qin Hai rubbed his eyes and tentatively called out. "Dingzi, what are you doing there?" After hearing Qin Hai's voice, the person's shaking body stopped instantly. 3 seconds later, the man slowly turned his head. His face had already lost its color, and he was as pale as a living person. His eyes were like 2 bottomless black holes with blood, and there was a scalp covered in black hair hanging from the corner of his mouth. Upon seeing this, Qin Hai was so shocked that he stood still and couldn't move. He wished he could stop his breathing and heartbeat to avoid provoking the monster in front of him. The man sometimes leaned over to listen, sometimes arched his nose and kept searching for prey in the air. Coincidentally, Qin Hai's phone suddenly received a text message. With a ding-ling sound, the monster immediately locked onto the target, opened its arms and roared at Qin Hai before rushing towards him. There were no tools in the room, and when the monster came in, it was like catching a turtle in a jar. With a swoosh, Qin Hai jumped from the bed and flipped over to the door, forcefully closing it. Unexpectedly, the monster's arm just reached in, got stuck between the door and the frame, and kept waving towards Qin Hai. The door couldn't be locked, and Qin Hai could only use all his strength to press against the door. Unexpectedly, these continuous noises attracted more zombies, who kept hitting the door. Qin Hai's shoulder was hurting and his strength was getting weaker. Suddenly, Qin Hai slipped and couldn't stop the zombies' attack. Qin Hai, lying in bed, kicked his feet and suddenly woke up, gasping for breath. His heart thumped wildly for a while before finally calming down. He knew very well that his current self was like a sheep locked in a cage, being stared at by wolves outside every day was like a frightened bird. He didn't have to worry about food and drink for the time being, but the pressure in his heart was too great. No one can guarantee that this nightmare-like scene will not become a reality. Qin Hai wiped the sweat off his face and decided to use his own strength to kill the few zombies in the yard. As soon as he came up with the idea, everyone expressed their support. Zhang Weiming remotely unlocked the car with the car key, and the zombies followed the sound as they walked out of the yard. Then, Qin Hai grabbed the chain lock and walked gently to the door. The entire gate is made of iron, and when it opens and closes, it makes a loud, clattering sound. He tries to close the door as gently as possible, but the noise is still not small enough. At this moment, Ding Cheng also came out of the house and climbed up towards the farthest corner of the yard from the gate, shouting at the zombies. The zombie heard the shout and ran excitedly towards Ding Cheng's position. Qin Hai had no concerns and successfully closed the door and locked it. Everyone breathed a long sigh of relief with the crisp sound of the click, and the zombie was locked outside the door. Then, with a slight movement, they left and gradually moved away from here, finally able to sleep peacefully. But such a day has not passed for half a day. At noon, the sky was overcast and the air was full of damp soil smell. After a loud thunder, the power was cut off, and the network and mobile phone signals were also lost. The mobile phone signal is powered by optical power, which is not the same as civilian power. The power outage is likely to cover the entire city, and there is little hope of restoring power supply. In this way, life is completely paralyzed, the only channel for communication with the outside world is closed, and the support point in everyone's heart also collapses, making the future seem even darker. We can't wait any longer, we'll set off early tomorrow morning. Ding Cheng's tone was unusually firm. Yi and Han Fuiying exchanged a glance, and their intention to stay behind was also somewhat shaken. What are your plans? Zhang Weiming asked. Ding Cheng frowned and shook his head. To be honest, I'm not sure what to do next. Anyway, we can't stay here anymore. It's currently a power outage, and there might be another water outage in a few days. This city is not very big, and all resources will eventually be depleted. If we leave then, we won't have time. Ding Cheng's words are very reasonable. From the first day of the virus outbreak until now, the situation has been deteriorating without any signs of improvement. If this continues, the city of northern Hangzhou will eventually be abandoned. Qin Hai cleared his throat and said, since that's the case, why don't we discuss a plan first? If it's needed, we won't be caught off guard. Okay, I agree, Zhang Weiming agreed. Let's allocate according to our existing resources. For cars, including Ding Cheng's, there were originally a total of 4 cars, but one was left in the Tianxin Park community. Let's not worry about it. Food and water are essential items. Qin Hai glanced at the table in the corner and continued, the danger level in the city is too high, and there is no place to buy things on the highway. Before leaving, we still need to go to supermarkets and shops, and we can find as many things as we can. That's right. I'll drive around and take a look at the highways and national roads later. I'll go wherever I can and add some gas to the car. Ding Cheng stood up and put the car key in his pocket. Chapter 10. Poor mountains and rivers encounter the hidden willows and bright flowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The grouping is completed, with Yi, Han Fuiying, and Ding Cheng together. There is no need to leave anyone in the studio, while Qin Hai and Zhang Weiming go out to search for supplies. In the current situation, group combat is better than fighting alone, and it is agreed that no matter what you will face after going out, you must come back before 5 p.m., plan your route, and they will set off separately. Zhang Weiming is a local who is more familiar with this city than Qin Hai. Their first stop was a professional outdoor sports shop located on Lijiang Road. Zhang Weiming had visited this place before going abroad for a trip years ago. As expected, the store door was tightly locked. After looking around without any danger, I took out the fire extinguisher and trailer rope from the trunk and put them inside. First, I put the handle of the fire extinguisher into the lock of the rolling shutter and tried to use the lever principle to open the lock. A few minutes later, they gave up. The gate lock was too sturdy, and the screws on the lock were all welded to the ground. With personal strength, it was impossible to pry, so they immediately changed to another plan. Wrap the trailer rope around the door lock, pull hard while driving, and only hear a very loud explosion sound. After that, the door is torn off by 1/3, and there is no problem entering or exiting. Through the glass door, you can see various tools inside the store. They waited at the door for 1 or 2 minutes to make sure that the noise did not attract zombies, while discussing what items they needed. Zhang Weiming has more experience in this area than Qin Hai. He suggests that on the way out, tents, backpacks, sleeping bags, climbing ropes, cooking utensils, and water bottles are all necessary. After the discussion is over, prepare to go in and sweep the goods and leave directly. Unexpectedly, as soon as the glass door was pushed open, the online alarm system in the store automatically activated, and a huge and piercing alarm sound immediately sounded. The sharp sound made Qin Hai's heart panic, and the plan discussed before entering was instantly shattered. They simply don't understand why this damn alarm system is so dedicated in the face of a power outage throughout the city, leaving their minds blank and unsure of what to do. Qin Hai tried his best to control himself and not be affected. He approached Zhang Weiming and shouted, quick and decisive, take whatever you can. Then he punched him in the chest, and Zhang Weiming also regained his senses. He probably felt that everything he could use was in his arms. After a few seconds, the high-frequency alarm sound indeed attracted zombies from all directions to rush towards him. They threw their things in the back seat and drove away quickly. Qin Hai crawled from the front row to the back to check the things he had received. There were not as many types as expected, but he saw an ice pick among a pile of items. The tip of the pickaxe is bent downwards and has a gear-like shape on top, which is both sharp and sturdy, making it very suitable for the arc of swinging and the stability of grasping in the hand. Although there are only ice axes, in dealing with zombies, as long as the number is not large, the combat effectiveness needs to be improved by a certain level. Not much time was wasted here. They simply discussed and decided to look along the road where there were suitable shops. Perhaps due to the large number of neighborhoods around, the whole street was in chaos, and the doors of the shops were almost incomplete, all violently opened. Fragments of the rolling shutter and broken glass doors were everywhere, and the shops were also looted. Qin Hai took out his phone and took a photo outside, then inserted it into his phone memo, stating the current situation of this road. Go elsewhere and see, before this city is hollowed out, hoping to find what we want. Zhang Weiming was also stunned by everything in front of him, unable to speak. As he walked, he kept sighing through the rearview mirror. After circling the city for about an hour and returning to the studio, Ding Cheng and his companions had already returned early, and the results of their exploration were not ideal. The personnel who were originally guarding the high-speed railway station had all been evacuated, leaving only the explosion-proof fence placed at the entrance. I didn't dare to go in and take a look. There was a notice on the glass wall stating that the high-speed rail was shut down, even if it was open, it wouldn't work. The carriages were in a closed state, and if something happened, it was very likely that the whole army would be destroyed. There are 2 options to leave this city. Highways and national highways. How about it, has the ban been lifted? Zhang Weiming asked nervously. Yi shook her head and said, there's no one to take care of over there, but the escaping cars have already blocked the road. Before we came back, several cars crashed and exploded. One more thing, all the gas stations are out of gas. Ding Cheng's hesitant words were like bad news, everything came faster and worse than expected, which could only indicate 2 things. Firstly, Hangbei was completely abandoned, 2, the virus has spread to more places. Yi fell into Zhang Weiming's arms in silence. Qin Hai's gaze turned to Han Fuiying, but she did not show any weakness or fear. Her eyes flickered, as if she was thinking about something. From now on, everyone can drive a car together. There's no need to turn around near the city center. Tomorrow morning, let's go to the ring road and take a look. There aren't many residential areas next to the national highway, maybe we can think of a way, or... Before Qin Hai could finish speaking, Han Fuiying suddenly moved and bounced up from the sofa. Warehouse. The remaining 4 people stared at Han Fuiying with big eyes and small eyes, looking at her with a puzzled expression. She saw that everyone couldn't understand her meaning and anxiously squeezed out 4 words. Express warehouse. Zhang Weiming suddenly realized and continued, yes, there is a logistics company in Ding. Ding Yu is Ding Cheng's half-brother. Ding Cheng's face showed a hint of embarrassment, as if he didn't really want to contact this relative. Among them, only Qin Hai was not very familiar with Ding Yu, as Ding Cheng had never mentioned him before. Originally, Ding Yu was the son of Ding's father, Ding Jianzhang, and his first wife. A few years later, due to long-term business activities outside, family conflicts continued. The two eventually divorced, and their son was awarded to his ex-wife. Later, they met Ding's mother, who had a very compatible temperament and personality. Now, business is getting bigger and bigger. Although he had a failed marriage, it did not delay the relationship between father and son. Ding Jianzhang entrusted a part of his business to Ding Yu, who was originally a logistics company. His main business was the timber business of the headquarters, mainly engaged in trade import and export. Under the care of the headquarters, Ding Yu was also very ambitious and immediately opened a courier company, connecting with e-commerce platforms, and his career was thriving. Han Fuiying suddenly mentioned this company, and Qin Hai thought the target was the goods in the express delivery company. He immediately asked, "Are you saying that the express delivery in the warehouse is like opening a blind box? Maybe there's something we want inside." "By the way, what's important is the warehouse," Han Fuiying answered him without affirmation or denial. Ding Cheng cleared his throat and said, "What she means is that there is a source of goods in the warehouse for the supermarket." After some express delivery companies grew up, they also cooperated with several large supermarkets in Hengbei City to regularly stock up on them. In addition to fresh products, there are a wide variety and large quantity of products such as rice, noodles, alcoholic beverages, canned fast food, etc.